Welcome back.
Yeah. Today, we got a really exciting topic.
Yeah, it's very interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, and I hope some of our listeners who are part of this career and field enjoy this episode.
Yeah. So we have the birth of medics and the ambulance service.
Yeah, EMS.
EMS. Let's get started.
Let's do it.
Welcome, cadaver crew.
Get your dark little minds right and settle in.
Class is in session and the cadaver is already on the table.
I'm V.
And I'm Sam.
And this is the Cadaver's Lessons.
Yeah, so we're not really talking about necessarily a body part by any means. No body system to discuss today. I went a little heavy on anatomy the last 2 episodes, so this is our break. We are going to talk about the birth of EMS, and case file this week is something that's super duper interesting and has actually been featured on the Pit. So birth of EMS and kind of how we use it now and how it's still expanding and how it still has so far to go and how the U.S. and a few countries that practice the same as us are very different than other countries.
Very.
And which one's better? I don't know. As someone who just got her ass kicked on an ER shift, not feeling great about the U.S. system right now, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you want to put your priorities and your money.
Yeah.
It's all about where you want to spend your money and who do you want to give that money to.
Yes. All right. Vitals check.
Well, besides you working 3 night shifts in a row, which is brutal for you, but also a little brutal.
Yeah. Oh, it's brutal for the whole house. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm only required, it's like 2 night shifts a month. I go ahead and I work 3 night shifts every month and I work them the same as my weekend. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that way I just go ahead and knock out my night shifts and one of my weekend sets of shifts all at once. And it is brutal for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also went to Florida for work.
Yeah.
And during spring break.
Yeah.
Which was a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the airport, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with the airport right now, but specifically this airport had no food. I got there and my flight was like at 7, no food to be found, and I was starving. So I think I just got like an Uncrustable, some of those little cheese wheel things, and some like Chex Mix, and that was my dinner.
Fun fact, my go-to airport dinner is airport sushi. Which is
a
disgusting.
Weird thing.
I don't know why. There's something about when I fly, the only thing I feel like I can stomach, especially if I get a headache or something in flights, is airport sushi.
Yeah, it's odd.
It's odd.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because usually when I'm traveling, especially like in the airport, I'm thinking about like, what are the things I don't usually get to have?
Yeah.
You know? And so it's usually some fast food, shitty
that I don't like
restaurant that you hate and that I don't usually get to get at home.
ER moments. I had what I hope will be the worst nosebleed of my career ever. Definitely was the worst one thus far. The patient wasn't even on a blood thinner. We ended up placing bilateral rhino rockets, 5.5 and a 7.5, sent her to the ICU for how significant it was, even though we had gotten control in the emergency room, just because we knew it was going to happen again and our hospitalists aren't trained on posterior packing. It's one of those things where you walk in and as soon as you walk into a room, you automatically just want to walk out before you get the story and just start collecting supplies because you know what's about to happen. Yeah. Worst nosebleed of my career for sure. And I hope it's the worst one I ever see.
Yeah.
She easily lost probably about 700 cc's of blood from her nose by the end of it. At least. It might have been more now that I'm saying that.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I got nothing to say about that because it's just shocking.
Yeah. Parenting. Our kid just doesn't sleep anymore, y'all.
Yeah. I think I've said this before, but you know, when you look up
this many months sleep
regression, and they're like, yeah, it'll probably last a few days or a couple weeks and it's normal and they're just going through these things and you just have a sleep regression every couple months. And it's like, no, I don't want that anymore. So tired.
She's going through it though. I feel bad for her.
Yeah.
We are going through it. There's a lot of lack of sleep in this house.
As per usual.
Yeah. But then she wakes up. Well, this morning she wasn't super happy, but other mornings she wakes up and she's like, hey, and you're so tired. And
why are you so tired?
Yeah. And you just kind of feel like a shitty parent because your kid is ready to go. And you're like, I am exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Podcast wins. Had some new countries pop up on the board. We had some islands that we had to look up because we had never heard of them before. I think we've crossed the country number 20 by this point.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah. So keep spreading the good word.
Yeah. All right, let's get started on today's topic. So, not so much of an anatomy crash course today, but a crash course about EMS and the roles and the continental differences, because we actually have a ton of listeners from France and we have a ton of listeners from Europe in general. I want to make sure they understand that our EMS system in the United States,
different.
Yes, is very different. Very different. So let's get started. So, reminder for people that aren't in the medical field. EMS is the first point of contact for the majority of people during true acute emergencies and life-threatening injuries. And they're the people that get them from home, from point of contact to the emergency room in the United States. And so these people are a key difference in a lot of survival rates. And deploying the right people to these calls and all of those things becomes incredibly important because of these things. There are two different type of pre-hospital providers. There's your EMT, which is your emergency medical technician. They are trained in basic life support. So bleeding control, CPR, AED use, basic meds like epinephrine and Narcan, and then splinting. They have in the United States 120 to 170 hours of training, which is approximately 3 months. Then there's the paramedic, which a lot of people will just call medics. They have a higher, more complex scope of practice. So they are trained in advanced life support, which includes IVs, more medications, and advanced airway management. And their training is approximately 1,200 to 1,800 hours, somewhere in between 14 to 18 months, and it's sometimes considered an associate's degree here in the United States. So there's a massive difference between our EMTs and our medics. And I still fully believe there's a place for both in our medical system.
Yeah, you just have to use them in their proper scope. You can't expect an EMT to provide care to a medic standard.
Yeah. All right, continental differences. So there's the biggest difference is how we handle the lower acuity incidents. In the US, we follow an Anglo-American practice. Yeah, an Anglo-American practice. And the way people describe this is, quote, scoop and run or, quote, load and go. So the focus is on rapid transport to the emergency room. We want to spend as little amount of time on scene as possible, get the patient in the bus, and get them to the ER for further treatment. If there has to be any treatment done on scene, such as like Narcan or something like that, you want to do it as quickly as possible and get them ready to transport as quickly as possible. In this practice, the paramedics or the EMT are the only ones on scene, typically with medical oversight, meaning sometimes we do get calls to the emergency room and we'll get like an overhead saying like doc to the biophone for a consult, and it'll be one of our buses and they'll say, this patient's heart rate is 30. Am I allowed to push epi? You know, whereas when we're going to get into the next one, they have doctors on the scene that make these calls. And so there's just medical oversight in this Anglo-American practice. In this practice, EMS is a part of the public safety organization, which is going to differ. And the countries that mainly practice this are the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Then in the major parts of Europe, there's the Franco-German practice. So this is considered a, quote, stay and stabilize or, quote, delay and treat. And one of the things I wanted to bring up is that in the United States, when Princess Diana died, there was a lot of controversy in the United States because people were questioning why EMS stayed on scene for so long before transporting her. But this is the practice of where they are. And so it's on-scene stabilization. And then if they need to go to the hospital, it's typically a direct admission to the floor that they are going to go to. They don't go through the ER.
No emergency room. Yeah.
No emergency room. So they essentially bring the hospital to the patient. Their buses are stocked. There's a doctor or physician on board, and it's completely different than what we do in the United States. It's run by the physicians. There's an extensive scope of practice on scene, and there's advanced technology that they're equipped with in order to treat these patients where they are met. The goal of this is to treat at the scene and decrease the emergency room overload. And as someone who just had an emergency room overload night, and I had just done these notes, I was like, wow, how great would it be to be a part of this practice? In this case, EMS is a part of the public health organization, so different than the public safety organization. And countries that practice this are Germany, France, Greece, Malta, and Austria. Both practices, though, minimize scene time for high trauma. So that's where the emergency room is used equally for both of them. If it's high trauma, they're going to need, trauma surgery, scans, all of those things. These patients in both practices get brought immediately to the emergency room. So pretty big difference, though. If you could imagine how different my load would be when a patient comes in respiratory distress, and we already know they're going to have to go on BiPAP and go to the ICU. If they could just go straight to the ICU and get intensivist level of care versus coming, getting all of my labs back, getting my imaging back, even though I know they're going to end up in the ICU. Yeah, very different.
It'd be interesting to see like the statistic comparison.
I have a little bit on that at the bottom.
Ooh.
Yeah, we'll come back to it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the history, where this all started. And I found it interesting because different sites say different things.
Father of EMS.
Yeah, it's just about where you live kind of dictates who you think started it. But this is what I gathered from my information. And so this is what we're going to go with today.
Perfect.
So the development of the Emergency Medical Services, or EMS, comes directly from the battlefield medicine throughout time. And the concept of being able to triage and evacuate those who are injured from the battlefield to care, where that was kind of dependent on the battle and the geographical location.
Yeah. And like if we had chest tubes or not, that could be moved.
The technology and all that stuff. So now we're going to talk about a few breakthroughs when it came to emergency services, especially in battlefield scenarios. The first one we're going to talk about is Dominique Jean Larrey, who was a prominent French surgeon during the Napoleonic Wars. He is credited with an estimated 24 significant surgical advances within his lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah. But
that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but today we're just going to specifically talk about why he is dubbed the father of emergency medical services. And I find this funny, and this is why Sam was laughing earlier, is because there's another person who's also considered the father of EMS
in the United
States.
Yes.
So not in the world, but in the United States. Whereas Mr. Leary here,
he was the real deal.
He was the real deal.
Yeah.
So before we talk about what Dominique Jean Larrey did and how he changed battlefield health and triage, let's get a picture of what we were dealing with and what battle was like before his breakthroughs, because it was rough
and very different from today.
Yeah. So battlefield medical care was rudimentary, chaotic, and heavily influenced by social rank rather than medical need. You can see where this is going, possibly.
This is bad.
So here's some key characteristics that were experienced on the battlefield if you were injured during battle.
Yeah.
Which is scary because could you just think about if you were in battle and then you had to experience this?
Yes.
Number 1, delayed evacuation. Common practice was that the wounded should be left where they fell and gathered only after the battle was over. This could be anywhere from 24 to 36 hours, maybe even longer.
I was about to say, sometimes battles last a long time. 36 hours, you're bleeding out, baby. You're not making it.
Right.
Not making it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and usually if they were to evacuate, they would have to evacuate themselves or rely on civilians to come and help evacuate them.
In the middle of battle.
Usually that's why they waited.
Yeah.
Civilians are like, I'm not going in there. And so they would have to wait and it was disorganized civilians that were just pulling wounded soldiers to the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was also rank-based triage. So the wounded were treated based on social status rather than severity of wounds.
Imagine some guy has this like super small lac on his arm that might not even need a repair. But if so, just a lac repair.
Yeah.
And you're bleeding out and they go to that guy first. Yikes.
So here was the order. Number 1, wounded friendly officers. So friendly officers first, friendly soldiers second, and then enemy soldiers. So if you were caught behind enemy lines, injured, or as the front moved, you were injured and they came and picked you up, you were not getting treatment anytime soon.
You're at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was also a lack of organized transport. So like I was speaking, there was no organized ambulance corps or medical corps that would go out to the battle and then bring people back to usually the field medicine camp that was behind the lines. Like I said, you had to rely on self-evacuation or aid from a civilian, a Samaritan that walked by.
Oh, this guy's bleeding. Come with me.
Yeah. Let me help you.
I mean, I'm sure it's slightly more organized than that, but still.
Yeah. There was also distance requirements. So regulations previously kept the large ambulance wagons roughly 2.5 to 3 miles away from the immediate danger zone in the rear.
Just for their own protection, or?
Yeah, because they were so big and chunky.
Okay.
They're so big and chunky, they couldn't get them in there.
Yeah.
Especially based on, if it was mountainous terrain, not getting any closer. So they were kind of just parked, and they held all the supplies and everything. So you had to go to them. They weren't coming to you.
This sounds like a lot of people died.
Yep.
Yeah.
There was also high mortality and sepsis due to long delays. Many wounded soldiers died from sepsis, tetanus, or complications from infections before they got any attention at all.
I fully believe that.
Yeah. There's also slow surgical intervention. Surgery was often delayed. So usually if you suffered an injury and you would have to get an amputation, they waited for the dead tissue to be well established before they did the amputation.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's a really bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't even like putting leeches on it or anything,
Yeah. They were just like, we're going to see how far that goes, and then that will tell us where to amputate.
Man.
Yeah. So not great.
Oh.
So there was lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, we're starting from the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. So now we can get into a quick background of our guy, Dominique Jean Larrey, who was born in 1766. He was orphaned at a young age and was tutored by a local priest in the south of France. So just a little orphan kid. And then at the age of 13, he walked 70 miles alone to Toulouse to study medicine under his uncle's guardianship and begin an apprenticeship as a dresser. And if you're wondering what a dresser is, it's kind of exactly how it sounds. They were the subordinate medical worker responsible for practical patient care, such as cleaning, dressing wounds, and applying bandages. So think of like your CNA.
Yeah, your local. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what he did as an apprentice. And then at the age of 21, he decided to walk to Paris. I don't know what it is with this guy and walking.
He's getting his steps in. He's healthy.
Yeah, he's trying to get his steps in for sure.
Yeah.
Where he took rigorous exams in order to be appointed the auxiliary surgeon in the French Navy. He eventually quit the Navy after like 6 months and joined the Army because of his severe sickness. He was like, that's not for me.
Do you think he'd ever been on a boat before?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how often this happened to people. Like they join the Navy and, even now it's not like people just get on boats every
all
day.
the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it blast. Can do this.
Especially boats that are in deep waters. We're talking about like, okay, your fishing boat on a river or, even small ocean bay or something like that.
Yeah, like deep sea fishing.
Yeah, even that is not nearly the same.
No,
not the same kind of waves happening. That's just why I also decided not to join the Navy was seasickness and my hate for swimming in the ocean.
Yeah. B doesn't want to explore space and doesn't want to explore the ocean.
I'd be more down with space though.
Fair.
I am more down with space. I just don't want to go to space. Ocean though, I don't think that was meant to be for us.
No, it's not.
They're scary things. So he first experienced war in 1792 when he joined the Army of the Rhine as a chirurgie aide major, basically a surgeon aide major, where he proposed his most impactful advancements in casualty care. Eventually, his advancements would be approved by Napoleon Bonaparte himself,
Ooh.
and they eventually developed a close personal friendship.
Besties.
Yeah. By 1805, he was the surgeon-in-chief of the French army, and in 1810, he was granted the title of Baron by Napoleon. So he moved up.
His walk-in was worth it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't even like that old. He did a lot of that very, very quickly. He's in his 30s when he made all of his advancements.
Mm-hmm.
So now what did he actually do? What did he bring to the table? Well, most notably, and what's relevant to our episode today, the modern ambulance, field surgery operations, and triage systems.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of stuff to bring to the table.
Yeah. And then you're kind of like, common sense, guys. Why weren't we thinking about this before?
I mean, because now it's a part of our everyday practice.
Sure.
But before they didn't have these large scale practices,
Yeah. So I'll get into the specifics and then you can tell me, like, if you thought this was wild to think about in the...
You sound a little judgy, okay?
1700s. I'm a little judgy. I'm judgy because I'm going to tell you these things and then it's going to take people still 70 years or more to get on board with them.
Yeah. You should read blog. I read this blog from a personal EMT that's been in the field for 30 years now, and it's only been a practice in the United States for like 60 or 70 years, right?
Yeah,
He's
it's
been
not
a part
that
of it the
old.
whole time, or he's been a part of it half the time. And he was saying how long it takes to make these advancements.
Mhm.
Then he was like, but if you guys knew how much we're pushing for right now and it's not moving, you would be even madder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure I would be.
Yes.
Yeah. Larrey was an advocate for providing surgery as swiftly as possible, which went against common practice that believed that waiting till the dead tissue was well established before removing a limb. So, check this out. His stats were pretty crazy. For his procedures, he was able to amputate a leg within 1 minute.
Okay. So that's him literally just taking a axe or something like that, like a saw, and sawing through it. We're not like cauterizing any arteries or anything like that.
Well, I'm going to tell you what he did.
Okay.
Because he had a special approach to amputation.
Okay,
so-
tell me. I'm sorry.
And he could amputate an arm in 17 seconds.
That's an axe.
No, it's
No, that's probably a saw
it's
still.
They're not using axes to amputate. Oh, no. No. So, in the Battle of Borodino in 1812, he performed over 200 amputations in 24 hours.
200? Yeah, that seems a bit too much. Are we following sterile procedure?
Yes.
I think someone can make a meme out of me in sterile procedure.
He developed the inverted cone approach to amputation, which allowed skin flaps to be sewn together over the site with wound washing, reducing mortality from over 90% to less than 25%.
Okay, that's significantly better. Significantly.
Yeah.
But it's still quite high.
Well, yeah. It's still rough.
Still a lot of people are dying. If someone says there's a 1 in 4 chance you're not going to survive this.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to survive anyway if you're not going to amputate it.
For sure. I mean, amputate it, but still.
Yeah. So because he was all about speed, he also developed the flying ambulances, specialized transports that could be used in either 2 or 4-wheel configurations, depending on the terrain, and stocked medical supplies for swift surgery, also food, dressings, and clean water to wash wounds.
Imagine you're bleeding out and someone rolls up in a motorcycle.
Not a motorcycle.
I mean, 2 wheels.
Not 2 wheels this way, 2 wheels this way. Little wagon, horse-drawn wagon.
Okay, I'm not going to be the only one that thought about that.
A wagon.
You didn't say that, did you? Specialized transports.
Okay.
Okay.
A wagon. Sorry, I should have been more clear.
You should have been. I was picturing somebody pulling up on a bike.
You know, like our kids push bike, Strider bike.
Yeah, like
I'm coming.
coming. I really just imagined someone kicking out their back tire as they come in, like, I'm
Skidding
here.
in. Oh my goodness.
Wagons.
Wagons could be 2 wheels or 4 wheels, and they were pulled by horses or camels. So, not motorcycles. These wagons employed sliding shutters, spring suspensions, padded litters, and doors at the front and rear to better facilitate transport.
It's like the birth of the modern ambulance.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. These ambulances took the wounded quickly from the active battlefields, providing emergency services on the way, and gathered casualties to a military field hospital 3 miles behind the lines. So instead of all of the ambulance wagons sitting 3 miles away,
Yes.
these
Are mobile.
and they would go out during active battle, pick up wounded, and then bring them back to that 3-mile point. And then they could also do surgery, though, if need be, there on site.
Yeah. I mean, certain types of surgery. Very
Yeah.
different than what we picture as surgery today. Let's keep that in mind.
Right. So these ambulances were able to reduce the delay of medical care from 24 to 36 hours to 1 hour.
Big difference.
It's a pretty big deal.
I feel like 3 miles is also a really far place, but I also understand that the medical tent has to be in a safe spot.
Especially if you have artillery.
Yeah.
The range of artillery has to...
Yeah, I guess you're right.
So these ambulance units were comprised of 3 divisions of 113 men each. I was like, that's weirdly specific, and like, why not 120?
Yeah.
Why you gotta pick an odd number? Anyways, with a chief surgeon, 15 reporting surgeons, a trumpeter to carry surgical instruments, and a drummer boy in charge of dressings.
And sometimes wound sucking.
Yeah, this was past that point, but yes, same idea. So in 1792, Larrey developed the modern triage system. He wrote, We would always start with the most dangerously wounded without regard to rank or distinction.
Yes, yes, yes.
And those less severely wounded must wait until the gravely hurt had been operated on and addressed.
Okay, for those listeners, now you understand why sometimes I go see another patient before I go see you and your absolutely ridiculous complaint that you're coming into the ER for at 3 a.m.
Your stubbed toe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your dry cough.
Yeah. That you haven't taken any meds for.
Yes. It started 2 hours ago.
Even with these amazing results, other countries did not catch on quickly. The British Army would not use ambulances for another 60 years.
And what about the U.S.? I mean, U.S. took forever too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the British did use transport carriages for cholera patients in London in 1832. So they did use a similar system during that outbreak. And in the United States, they didn't even start evacuating wounded from active battlefields until 1862.
Almost 100 years later.
Yes. I mean, we were barely a country.
We'd been a country for almost 100 years.
Yeah, after, at that point. But I guess we had like the Franco-Indian Wars and we had wars. We had plenty of wars to practice on, but really it didn't come to fruition till the Civil War.
Interesting.
So Major Jonathan Letterman established the U.S. Ambulance Corps within the Army of the Potomac to triage wounded on active battlefields rather than retrieving them after the battle is ended. So he copied.
He copied, yes. I was about to say, this sounds strangely familiar.
Based on its success saving lives, Ambulance Corps was adopted throughout the Union Army. Letterman is considered the father of U.S. EMS.
U.S.
Yeah, right. So those are kind of your very beginnings of starting to see Ambulance Corps and those services become available through the battlefield. So what about the civilian side? In 1865, Cincinnati, Ohio established the first civilian ambulance service operated out of the commercial hospital.
That's cool.
Yeah. So this is also where we start to see a break of who is responsible for the ambulance services,
yes.
which gets very tricky and still is.
And still is. And that's part of the reason most people think a mix of the two, like the continental differences, that a mix of the two would be best. But the issue becomes who's going to pay for it. And so then they just leave it as is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 1869, the New York service was provided out of Bellevue Hospital, which stocked ambulances with medical equipment such as splints, stomach pumps, morphine, and brandy.
Brandy!
So you can see where their medical thought process was at the current time in the 1860s.
Yeah.
I'm like, what you using your stomach pump for?
Yeah, it's funny. Stomach pump?
Alcohol poisoning?
Perhaps.
Yeah, it wasn't quite prohibition yet. Getting it in while they can.
Yes.
You know? Some other notable civilian ambulance services were in 1881, the Vienna Voluntary Rescue Society, which started after the disastrous fire at Vienna Ring Theater and served as a model for similar societies. So that was built in Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1887, St. John's Ambulance Brigade was established to provide first aid and ambulance services in public events in London, but only in like public events. It wasn't a full-time gig.
I think having EMS on site, even at like, we went to that Red Rocks concert and there was the person that was ridiculously drunk and fell. You just want someone on site to say, yes, you're okay, or no, you're not okay. Let's load up, you know?
Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. In 1899, the first automobile ambulance was established within the Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. So beforehand, all this thing that I've been talking about this whole time, horse-drawn carriages.
Yes. I was just thinking, so polio, the case that we did the case file on was 1916?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head. And you remember they had pulled ambulances to try to help with the overcrowded hospitals and transporting people and all of that stuff. And so I knew we were getting close to ambulances, like what we think of as ambulances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these ambulances were donated to the hospital by 500 prominent local business owners. They all put it into like a pot of money to buy the first automobile ambulance.
That's so cool.
For Chicago.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Now, World War I comes around, as it tends to do in our stories, unfortunately. So here we can start to see the same type of battlefield ambulance services, and they start to use electric, steam-powered, and gasoline-driven ambulances to transport the wounded. There's also the introduction of traction splints, which allow for the transportation of patients with leg fractures.
Interesting. They needed a traction splint just to transport them?
I guess it made it easier.
Okay.
Yeah. And then also signal boxes were used to call for help to the wounded because they didn't have a wide array of two-way radios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say signal boxes, am I picturing, obviously not to today's technology, but do you know the call for help in the middle of a parking lot where you pick up the phone and it alerts them to your location?
Or like a telegraph system.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just after World War I, two-way radios became available for dispatch of ambulance in areas. So that happened right after.
Can't wait for our daughter to get into her walkie-talkie phase.
Oh, yeah. No cell phone, just walkie-talkie.
Yes.
In 1928, rural volunteer services began within Roanoke, Virginia, and life-saving and first aid crews were established. Other states followed, but quality and kind of service varied widely.
I mean, it's volunteer-based, so no shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no regulations either.
No.
Because there's no organization that's saying this is how you should stock an ambulance. This is how an ambulance should be made. Like, here's the dimensions. This is what needs to be included. Here's the things you have to know how to do. It's all just, yeah, I'll help out, So
I'm looking for something to do tomorrow night.
Right.
Yeah.
In the 30s and 40s, unregulated hodgepodge of service at state and local levels within fire departments, hospitals, funeral homes, towing companies, and volunteers setting their own standards.
Seems like the perfect recipe for disaster, if you ask me.
Transportation of patients remains the primary focus until after the mid-century. So they're not really providing any care.
No.
At all.
Yeah.
They're just picking you up and taking you to the hospital, or as close as they can get. Right. And then also severe manpower shortages because of World War II made it difficult for hospitals to maintain their ambulance operations, which is why it was taken up by so many other groups. So before, a lot of the hospitals were funding these ambulances so that they could be attached to the services that the hospital was providing. But because World War II took so many lives and people away from normal civilian jobs, there was no one to man that. They couldn't keep up with it. So then you have people just taking it up from the funeral home.
From the funeral home.
Yeah, that's who I want to be treated by.
Somebody that handles already dead people. Yeah.
I mean, they're probably better than an average person.
They're probably better than the average volunteer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there was no laws for training, and in many fire departments, assignments to the ambulance was punishment.
So people were stoked to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, you're on ambulance duty today. You can either clean the bathroom or be on ambulance duty.
And isn't it funny? Like, I would much rather be on ambulance duty.
Yeah.
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 Come
Put
on.
me on ambulance duty. But it was kind of considered that punishment. In the 1950s, this is where we start to see the beginnings of modern EMS. Funeral homes begin patient care and operate nearly half of the country's ambulances.
I mean, I guess this is going to sound awful, but I guess if
you
they
don't
die,
make it.
yes, if they die in your ambulance, you get them.
Yeah. You get to take them to your funeral home.
Yeah. So is that the best interest of the patient for the funeral home that would be getting paid for their death to be the ones taking care of them?
I don't know.
No way.
But they are the most medically trained people.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 1960s, because this is where we start to get into maybe some more common practices that we're familiar with. In the 1960s, we have the development of CPR and defibrillation as a standard form of care out of hospitals for cardiac arrest.
We are eventually going to do an episode on CPR. We thought we were going to do it sooner, but it is just such a big episode. We need time.
It's honky.
Chonka.
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 Chonka. There's also new pharmaceuticals, new drugs available, which allow for a different type of care. And faster care in some cases. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, the first experimental mobile coronary care ambulance was successful in resuscitating patients using these new technologies.
Love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so, I was just listening to my podcast on the way to work a couple of weeks ago, and it's so interesting because the way we teach CPR is actually just to make it easiest for the general population to understand. And so right in the center of the chest where we're told to do CPR is not actually the best place for it. It's I'm going off the top of my head, like 3 centimeters or something to the left. That's the best place. But when they were coming up with all of this and getting it widespread to teach people, if you find someone down on the street, like what to do, they thought that people would be too intimidated by saying this far on the left side of the chest.
It's a lot to remember in an emergency situation.
Yeah, but the issue is that we as medical professionals also do the exact same CPR as what we're teaching the general public. Yeah. Anyways, so I just think that's something new I'd heard, and it's coming from people who are doing more ultrasound during CPR, and people are actually able to see how well we are.
The compressions are actually compressing the heart.
Precisely. And all the like outflow and function and all of that. And so it's coming back around. But I just thought it was interesting that we as medical professionals are held to the exact same standard of CPR as like the general public.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah. You can just be like, hey, we know it's supposed to be 3 centimeters to the left. So
yeah,
find the center and then move your hands.
Just over.
Just over.
I mean, 3 centimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird. Also, in the United States, we have the Freedom House Ambulance Service was the first civilian emergency medical service to be staffed by paramedics, all of whom were African American.
Yeah. So this is the coolest thing to me, and we're going to get to talk more about it this week. It is mentioned in the pit, and I have met one guy that was a part of this. I had him as a patient, and at the time I did not know what it was, so I did not sit down in his room and learn everything.
Appreciate it.
Exactly, and I regret it 100%.
Yeah, it's really cool story. So if you're interested, join us for the case file this week.
Yeah, on Friday.
Yeah. Also, there was the release of this very important white page report called Accidental Death and Disability, the Neglected Disease of Modern Society.
This popped up everywhere when I was
yeah, it's the main cause and fuel to upgrade EMS services.
Yes.
Yeah, that's redundant. Emergency Medical Services.
Upgrade EMS.
It concluded that ambulance services in the U.S. varied widely in quality and were often unregulated and unsatisfactory.
Yes.
Yeah. Placed pressure on governments to improve emergency care in general, and this resulted in creating standards for ambulance construction concerning height of patient care areas and equipment on an ambulance that had to be carried.
Good.
Yeah, you don't really think about like the height.
No.
Like when you think of an ambulance today, you think of like the truck, the bus, and the big square, you know. But when you're looking at pictures of old school ambulances, you're talking about like cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, how are you transporting people in those?
Well, so that white page really drove some of the first standardization, documentation, training, all that good stuff so that we could all get on the same page here when it came to EMS.
Yeah, as it should be.
Yeah. In 1968, the nation's first call to 911 was received at a police station in Haleyville, Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah, so 911, not a thing till the late 60s.
Wow, that is, I mean, that's only 55 years ago.
Yeah, just think about your parents that were alive without 911.
Scary.
They couldn't call for help.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying. They just have to like call. You have to know the number for the local police department.
It sounds like another recipe for disaster.
Right. In 1969, mobile advanced life support debuts in New York City and Miami. Columbus, Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles follow soon after. This conference and the advanced life support kind of comes to fruition here. In 1972, Health Services and Mental Health Administration under the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare becomes the lead agency for EMS, formalizing a shift from primarily transportation services to emergency medical service.
Yeah, which is so needed.
Yeah.
So needed for patients.
Absolutely. So, because remember, kind of before it was just how fast can I get you to point A to point B?
Mm-hmm.
Not give you care. In between, especially because a lot of ambulances, quote unquote, were extra police forces or fire forces or, you know, people who were not trained medically but were already out and about. Yeah. Or the funeral home.
Or the funeral home so that when you die, you're stuck with them.
Yeah. 1973 EMS Systems Act established 300 EMS systems throughout the country. The Department of Transportation adapted training curricula for EMT -P and first responders.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they all need to know the same stuff so that when we dispatch this crew, we know what they can and can't handle.
Yeah. Also, new rules established EMS radio communications and introduced ambulance specifications. So more about the design of the ambulance and what should and should not be on it. Similarly, other countries such as the United Kingdom and France in the 1970s created agencies to set national standards. So they're
It's time.
Yeah, yes. In the 1980s, EMS autonomy and wider medical services highlight the need for medical oversight, and EMS physician emerges as a new specialty to ensure that care provided by EMS is both appropriate and beneficial. In 1984, Emergency Medical Services for Children, a program, adds an EMS emphasis on pediatric patients, because we have not talked about peds at all.
And I don't want to talk about peds.
Whole different story there. Different types of treatment.
Yeah. Very, very different.
Yeah. And then in 1999, EMS Educational Agenda for the Future, which recommends core content, scope of practice, and adds certification of EMS professionals, because before this, they did not have to be certified.
I mean, I'm like, oh, that was so long ago, but it was 25 years ago.
Yep.
And you didn't have to be certified to pick someone up and give them care.
Yep. I mean, your certification depended on there was no federal certification or anything that was the standard, so it was dependent on service to service.
Yeah.
So that you could have been required to be certified in some instances, but not in others.
It just wasn't, everyone had to be certified.
Yeah. And then in 2001, National EMS Information System begins to standardize storage and sharing of EMS data to improve analysis, research, and performance at local, state, and regional levels. So it's all coming to be connected.
Yeah. And we're still, I just want to make it very clear, fighting for all healthcare to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
So we have something where I can kind of look at the back door end of things and see information. But if someone wasn't seen inside of our hospital system, I do have to go through this back door. And in that back door, there's still sometimes not all the information I need. There was this cool case out in Alaska that I listened to where a patient had an aortic dissection and came into ERs for opioid management of it. I don't remember the full story. It was the type that didn't have to be operated on. It was kind of just this weird thing that was going on. But the ER doc that was taking care of her scanned her because she didn't know about this history of aortic dissection and saw it and was like, holy shit. And so to get out of Alaska, they're like trying to get a helicopter in, they're in like rural Alaska. And she's on the phone with someone in the mainland, Seattle, somewhere up there. And they're pulling it up and they're like, oh yeah, haven't you looked back at her scans? Like, this is a known dissection. You can see her notes. She just comes in for opioids and pain management, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, in fact, I don't have access to any of that. And it's a huge deal to be in rural Alaska and ask for someone to fly out and to change air traffic control patterns for someone to get over there for an emergency case. And we're still struggling a ton in modern medicine with getting all of this connected, which is silly.
Yeah, I mean, that's because people own different things. Yes. Companies own this portion and they don't want to share software with these people. And I mean, even ambulance wise, like different ambulances still, there is regulation on what they should look like. You could have more advanced technology and then different communication and, your ability to send information to an emergency room ahead of you getting there is dependent on you being able to have compatible. So it's all a shit show. Yes. To say the least. So that is the history of where EMS kind of came from.
Yeah. And now we'll talk about today. Working in the ER, I work with EMS crews every single shift. They do absolutely fantastic work. Sometimes they bring a patient in that I'm like, this probably shouldn't have been an emergent. We probably should have been more prepared for this. I have some crazy stories about that. My nosebleed being one of them. When I saw how much blood there was, I was like, I felt like we should have been more prepared than we were for this.
This should have been more urgent.
Yes, but work with them every day. We have some fantastic crews that come through our ER. So just remember, in the US, scoop and run. Pick them up, bare minimum stabilization in order to be able to transport and get them to the emergency room. In Europe, stay and stabilize and try to treat at the scene if you can, unless it's a high trauma situation. Both of them are bringing them into the emergency room. So EMS services in the United States today. The easy way to think about it is BLS is your basic life support, so more of the non-urgent things. Whereas ALS is advanced life support, so everything that BLS does, plus more invasive procedures. And you might question, why would we not just send ALS qualified personnel on every single call here in the United States? Because you never know what's going to happen on a scene. Obviously, you want the highest quality of care at every scene, kind of all of those things. And the answer is that you need those BLS crews to keep the ALS crews free in order to go out to these critical care patients.
Yeah.
85% of the cases in the United States are within the scope of BLS and do not require any advanced care. And so if EMS had to have ALS scope of practice, think about A, how much more money that would cost, and B, then these people aren't working to their highest scope of practice. And that's kind of how things get rusty. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Either way, studies show that rapid transport rather than advanced interventions have major impact on patient outcomes. So even if we send out a BLS crew to something and it ends up being more than what they thought it was, that rapid transport time is much more important than sending out an ALS crew to take over for them. EMS triage is, of course, its whole own thing. And so when someone calls and says, I'm having chest pain, that's a very different call than I have a small cut on my arm or something like that. Or like when we called and said our child is choking and turning blue, that's a very different call than something that's not emergent. And so it's important to remember that not every 911 call is an emergency, but if you over triage, this causes ER crowding.
Yep.
And so if we think that every single patient does need to come to the emergency room, overcrowds the hell out of us. And you're like, duh, we see this every day. My understanding is patients have to agree not to be transported to the emergency room. And so like when everyone showed up, when our kid was choking, I had to sign saying that I was denying them taking her to the emergency room and that we understood the risks of that. And so that very much leads to overcrowding in the emergency room. There's lots of people that don't need to come in. There's also lots of people that didn't need to call 911 in the first place. But if you under triage these, sometimes you really can miss a critical illness. So I had a patient a few weeks ago who came in all the time for abdominal pain, all the time. And I looked and I was like, I don't know. He hasn't had a CT scan in 3 months, which sounds like a very short period of time, but this guy's in all the time. And it just didn't make sense for me. And people are like, this is how he always acts. And I was like, he can't sit down. Like he's pacing the room. He's in so much pain. And they were like, yeah, kinda. And I was like, I don't know. I just don't feel good about it. I couldn't get him to sit down to do an exam. And if I can't do a good exam on you, I tend to over image because I don't have my physical exam to rely on. And this patient had acute appendicitis, right? And so you could easily say, man, this guy calls for abdominal pain all the time and is in the ER a few times a week. And you send him home and you don't bring him into the emergency room. If you can hear that, that's our dog snoring. And you don't send him into the emergency room. And then his non-complicated appendicitis turns into complicated with some sort of perforation. You've just missed that critical illness. A very easy surgery turns into a very difficult
situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this new emergency care practitioner scheme in the United Kingdom, and I'm not quite sure why they're calling it a scheme because it's good, right? Maybe it's just different. In the United States, if someone calls something a scheme, we connotate it as something bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has a negative connotation to it usually.
Yes.
You're scheming me.
Yes, precisely. But like this is something new in the United Kingdom that we'll see if it catches on anywhere else. But it's a new model of EMS, and it's aiming to reduce unnecessary ambulance transport to the ER. And so essentially what they're doing is they're enhancing and upgrading the skills of current paramedics so that assessment and treatment can occur without transporting patients. So that Franco one we were talking about earlier, where it's physicians that are going on scene. This new scheme in the United Kingdom is that we already take the paramedics that are in the system and train them up. So if they look at someone and say, oh, this isn't going to require anything, I don't need to transport you.
Yeah.
Which to me makes total sense. On the flip side of that, though, do I want to be the paramedic that decides that an abdominal pain doesn't need to go to the ER?
Yeah.
No. Would I be the paramedic that says that a rash, a laceration, something like that doesn't need to go to the ER? Sure. But it definitely turns into this.
I mean, they're given a lot of autonomy.
Yes, a ton of autonomy. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it. Like the paramedics do insane things in the field, insane things. It just seems like a lot of pressure on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, countries like Australia and New Zealand are contemplating adopting this, especially in their rural settings.
That makes most sense to me.
Rural settings 100% makes the most sense.
Yeah.
You think about drive out and drive back and how much time you're spending with that patient before they're actually getting to any practitioner level of care.
I mean, they could be 3 hours away from our closest hospital.
Yes. So I think that's where it would make a ton of sense.
Oh, absolutely.
So then studies about the European model versus the US model, and I'm obviously oversimplifying this. We know it's the Anglo-American versus the Franco-German. Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Something up there. There's no studies that are able to assess it and say that one is better than the other. And there's a few reasons for these. It's because countries with the Anglo-American model have well-developed emergency medicine, and the ER is recognized as a separate medical specialty altogether. Whereas in the Franco model, it's not as well developed of a specialty, and so it's kind of hard to make that decision, and that's why they're going directly up to the admission floor that they're going to. It's also hard because the like physician level of care versus paramedic level of care, the cost, the who is paying for it, all of those things, it's really hard to compare them side by side. Some people say it should be a mix of both of the models, but then there's this huge concern of funding, because if it is a mix of both of them, it would need to be a mix of both the public health and the public service payment. And then neither one of them are really going to want to pay for it because they think the other one should pay for it. And then this funding falls through. And now you get to a place where you don't have either one anyways.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it kind of, because when you look at the different wages of a physician here in the United States compared to a physician in Europe practicing, it's a large difference. Like the sum of money you would have to pay a physician to be on an ambulance is considerable.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, as someone who practices in the somewhat safety of an ER, I'm not saying our jobs are 100% safe. In the somewhat safety of an ER, I'm not sure you could convince me to go out on calls.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a different level of medicine. Like
it is.
First responders are a whole different breed, you know?
Yeah.
That's why they're so cool.
Yeah. And then kind of what are we doing now with ambulance and the EMS system and all of those things? One thing that's really cool that's starting to emerge is the mobile stroke treatment unit. And so our state that we live in has one of the only 3 units in the entire United States.
So now you can pick between the 3 to figure out where we are.
Yes. And I've had a few patients come in with the mobile stroke team, and it's pretty cool because half the stuff has already been done prior to hospital arrival. But on these treatment units, they have a CT scanner on board, and they use telehealth technology so that a neurologist can examine, diagnose, and recommend treatment.
That's crazy.
Wild. And so I will say, when we call a stroke in our ER, if it's not like normal business hours, the neurologist comes on camera and does the assessment on camera for the patient. So they're able to move the camera left, right, up, down, ask the patient, name, date of birth, raise your eyebrows, hold your arms out. Can you look this way, this way? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so the telehealth part is pretty cool, but it's standard for stroke at this time. What's cooler to me is that they are allowed to give TNK, the clot buster, based on neurologist recommendations prior to getting to the emergency room.
Yeah, and that's where you're getting the bang for your buck right there.
Yes, because time is brain, right? If you're having a true stroke, time is brain. And so it's super cool. It's also, in my opinion, a little dangerous, but obviously studies have backed it up because TNK does come with a significant side effect and risk profile. And if someone has one of these hemorrhagic strokes after we give this TNK now, and they're 30 minutes from the hospital, they're 30 minutes until we can get them any care.
Yeah.
And so it's just, obviously the studies show that these stroke units are worth it and that risk is worth the benefit and all of those things. But sometimes when patients come in, I'm always just a little bit nervous because TNK has already been given. So people a part of this team, it's a critical care nurse. So they are very highly trained, a CT tech to run the CT scanner, your neurologist via telehealth, and then most of the times there's a paramedic or EMT on board as well.
Nice.
Yeah. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I mean,
I think it's cool they have a freaking CT scanner on board.
Yeah, I know. I wonder how many calls they get.
And I don't know exactly because it's not like all of our stroke alerts that come in via EMS come in via this mobile stroke unit.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
One. So,
yeah,
like, I don't know how many people they have staffed.
Yeah. And I don't know if they say they have to have we use a stroke scale called an NIHSS. Like they have to have an NIHSS of X amount before this team will come out, because there has to be a high likelihood that they're going to give TNK, or else it's not worth these people going out. I don't know. But yeah.
It's cool, though. It's a cool idea.
I agree. The next thing that we're seeing a little bit more, especially in the state we live in, is mental health crisis teams. So these guys are normally separate from EMS, but they can be called out with EMS, with PD, any of those things. And so they actually send a behavioral health clinician to mental health or substance abuse calls and try to not send police. And these, yes. And these behavioral health clinicians can place these patients on an M1 hold, which is really important. Because if you have a patient that is suicidal with a plan or something like that, and then they say, no, I'm not going to the hospital, and you don't have someone on scene that can write an M1 and say, I'm so sorry, but you're on an involuntary hold, you have to go to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Like that could be bad. So these guys can place on M1s and oftentimes do if they're called to a scene, because they are called to a scene with significance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it called M1 everywhere? I don't think so.
No. No, because what do we call it in
IBC,
North Carolina? Involuntary commit. Yeah, so I guess I should explain that. I don't know what M1 stands for, actually, in our state.
I don't know either.
Mental, I don't know. An M1 hold, though, can be considered different things in different states. In North Carolina, where B and I initially worked together, we called these patients involuntary commits, and we would say they're on an IVC. And where I work, we say they're on an M1 hold. And so just keep in mind that can be different, but it's that involuntary 72-hour hold.
Yep.
Yeah.
Usually do, because the person is going to do harm to themselves or others.
Yeah. Or they're gravely disabled. Yeah.
Yep.
Those are the three big things.
Right.
Yeah. But these mental health clinicians can provide behavioral health assessments, crisis screening, and de-escalation. And like I said, they will oftentimes follow the patient to the hospital for us where we live. And it's great because their EMS will give me a super quick rundown of like, oh, we were called to the scene for this. The patient's vitally stable. I'm going to let this person tell you about the rest of it. And they give you a great synopsis about this is what happened. These are the stressors. Like they've already talked to the patient about so many of these things. And then they also will kind of pull you aside afterwards. We have one really great one that does this and say, hey, this patient does really well gaining trust through this method, and kind of just help you build a rapport a little bit with the patient, which always helps with your mental health calls.
Yeah, absolutely. These are vital, in my opinion. These situations can escalate so quickly if people are not trained appropriately on de-escalation. And so I just think, and it's not really anybody's fault that they weren't trained in mental health situations specifically. Like your average police officer could or could not, depending on their location, have the availability to go to training to de-escalate situations like this, but maybe they don't have the funding or availability to go to that training. And having the availability of someone who is very used to and does it on a professional basis day to day is able to talk patients down sometimes and connect with them in a way that maybe someone with a badge might not be able to. I think that's a valuable tool that does save lives in more ways than one.
Yes.
And decreases the amount of violent interactions between first responders and people, civilians that are within the area, which then creates more trust.
Yes.
And if you can have more trust with first responders, then things can get done more quickly, more efficiently, and it just allows for the system to work a little bit better. Whereas sometimes if you don't have that and there's a lack of trust between first responders and the community, then there can be a lot of tension and then things just don't get done.
Yeah.
And that could be, it could be anything but investigations or, other violent aspects as well.
Yeah. I also think about it in a totally different, I agree 100% with all of that, in a totally different manner from the medical side. Because if someone is super agitated, suicidal, they need to come to the emergency room, gravely disabled, homicidal, like all of these things that these people get brought in for, and they are not cooperating, and EMS, PD, whoever can't get them to cooperate, oftentimes we do end up going a chemical restraint route, aka using medications to calm them down so that we can safely transport them. And that has its own side effects and its own risks. Yeah. And so it's vital, 100% vital.
Yeah. Should see more of it.
I agree.
But it's also hard because Costs money.
Costs money.
You got to pay those people to go and be on call.
Yeah. The last part we'll really talk about is lack of EMS access in rural settings. So I did a rotation in Kansas at a critical access center and middle of nowhere. I also did a rotation in Torrington, Wyoming, which wasn't necessarily the middle of nowhere, but was still a pretty small hospital, and EMS crews were still widely affected around Torrington. In order to define an ambulance desert, it has to be a 25 or more minute drive for the ambulance to arrive. And that's like with sirens and everything on. So just think about that.
Yeah.
4.5 million Americans live in an ambulance desert.
I've never lived in an ambulance desert before. No. I don't think I ever will.
No, I just want you guys to think about if your child was choking and you knew it was going to take 25 minutes for somebody to get there. Get out of here.
You're screwed.
You're screwed. Yeah. Also, in these settings, they rely on volunteers. Yep. And so we've kind of talked about this, but the volunteers aren't trained to the same level. Some of them do have some training.
Or they've been trained in the past. Like they have certifications from the past.
Yeah.
Possibly.
But they're not trained to the same level. And so A, there's already the risk coming from the medical side of things. But then B, these volunteers, many of them are working at their normal jobs when they get the call. They have to stop what they're doing, go get the bus, go get the patient, and then get to the closest hospital, ER, whatever. And so it's very different than just having people driving around and then dispatch figures out who's the closest ambulance that has the services that this patient needs.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was in Kansas, people kept showing up in their like human clothes, not in scrub.
Human
Yeah, in their civilian clothes. I'm sorry.
Human clothes.
In their civilian clothes. And I was like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, we came from work. I'm like, yeah, we're at work. And then I finally figured out they're all volunteers out there. Yeah. Crazy stuff. This leads, as you can imagine, to much longer response times, which can be really dangerous in the traumas and the high acuity patients, anything like that.
Just think of the farming accidents.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Gotta know how to tourniquet appropriately.
Yes. There's also, when we get into these ambulance deserts, people will use air ambulances. And so pros, speed over long distance. Yeah. And oftentimes there's critical care nurses on these. And I say often, almost always, there's critical care nurses. So you do have advanced care in transit, but cons, they can't fly in weather, which we hit all the time in Kansas. We'd call, they would say it's way too windy. We can't fly. Looks like for this many hours. And you have a patient that's having a STEMI that we're trying to get out, and the closest hospital is 3 hours away, and you're trying to figure out, do we try to wait for air to get here, or do we put them in an ambulance with a volunteer to drive 3 hours?
Yeah.
Yes. Couldn't be me.
It's just something to think about if you're thinking about moving to a rural area.
Yes. And then obviously air ambulances are very expensive, and that bill does indeed come. And so what was interesting is when I was out in Kansas, I was talking to some of the nurses, and a lot of them pay for air ambulance insurance specifically.
I mean, if you lived in a rural area, it might be worth it.
Yeah. And they just did the math, and they said if even one person from our family ever had to be flown, it would make sense for us to pay for this insurance for the rest of our lives.
Wow.
Because that's how
expensive it is.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes. So yeah, in Kansas, I kind of talked about this, but it was many volunteers responding to these emergent calls. We had to rely on way more flights to get patients out due to drive times and due to if a patient was sick enough to have to be taken to another hospital, most of the time they were sick enough to need more than a volunteer, to be moving them. The other thing is that there is a city kind of near us, like a 2.5 hour drive from us, that they only have 2 ambulances in their whole crew of volunteers, what I'm saying? And if you take one of those out to drive 2.5 hours to my hospital and then 2.5 hours back home, that's 5 hours.
Without an extra ambulance.
Without an ambulance. And you're down to 1 ambulance for the city.
Boy.
Yeah. It goes so much of this makes me nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're living on the edge.
Yeah. And then also in Kansas, sometimes we would get fixed wings that came in instead of helicopters. And so what was interesting is that these volunteers would have to go pick up the critical care crew from the flight strip, drive them to our hospital that we were working at, pick up the patient, drive them back to the airstrip.
My goodness.
I know.
This is so inefficient. It is
so
hurting
inefficient.
me on the inside.
Yes. And then they would have to get on the plane. And then we all have helicopter pads, right? But obviously,
Nobody has a runway.
Precisely. And so then they have to find an airport to land at and then have an ambulance crew transport these patients from the airport to whatever hospital they were accepted at.
You would think we would be better by now.
I know. Wild stuff you don't think about in rural EMS.
Crazy.
Yes. And then just something else to consider is I'm going to broadly speak here. This does not fit every situation, but broadly speaking, if you're living in a rural area, you overall have a lack of access to care. You might have a primary care, but you might not have a cardiologist.
Yeah.
You might not have a pulmonologist. Like you might not have these other things.
Specialty care.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so this leads to lack of prevention and adequate management of medical problems. And so when patients come in, they're typically sicker and more acute exacerbations and shit's hitting the fan when they call 911.
It's also, I think, just the
mindset
of the rural
Yes.
community of like, it's got to be bad. If I'm
Yes.
going, because it's so far away, if I'm going, it's got to be bad. And that's when you know, like, okay, if they willingly came to the hospital, you know that shit is bad.
Yeah.
And you're going to need some help. But then you don't have any help.
And so rural settings, ambulance deserts, all of those things. And then also studies show that there are a higher percentage, not number, but percentage of trauma cases in these areas, rural areas, due to commuting longer distances and higher commuting
speeds.
So on top of all this acute exacerbation, long drive to get there, difficult to get them to a hospital, you also are going to see more trauma.
Yep, it's rough out there. It's a wild, wild west.
Wild, wild west. All right. I like to remind people about EMS safety because one of the first things you always learn about when you have to go through your like BLS and ALS is like, clear the scene. Is the scene safe to approach?
Yeah.
You know? And it's like the most annoying thing ever
funny,
because you have to say it out loud like, scene is safe to approach. Yeah.
You do your practice.
Yes. Yes. And so, yes, like scene safety always comes first, but they don't have the same resources or protections that we do working in an ER hospital setting, which in itself is not even that safe anymore nowadays, right? And so they have a huge risk of violence, traffic accidents, and walking into hazardous environments.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, if you're walking into what you know is going to be a code, are you really checking scene safety or are you trying to get on the person's chest to start compressions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fine line.
It's a huge fine line. Huge. And then last piece, a reminder for us providers. And I think it's very important to remember. I'm going to step up on my pedestal.
Step on up.
I would argue their job is harder than ours. Maybe not every day, but some days. They work with incredibly limited resources. They don't have a specialist that they can call. I mean, yes, they can call us to the emergency room, obviously, but like they don't have nearly what we have. When they come in to give you report, make eye contact with them and listen to what they have to say.
Yeah.
It is the biggest pet peeve of mine when I see EMS giving report and the provider already going over and starting to talk to the patient. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
After EMS gives me a report, I still go through every single question I'm going to ask the patient the exact same. So I don't miss anything. But you owe the respect to this person.
Yep.
To just listen to them. Their report takes 60 seconds.
Also, who are you going to believe more?
Yeah.
Who's the more reliable source in some situations, right? Yeah. It's like if you have a confused patient that can't answer your questions, you need that information.
Yes. And so that brings me to my last point of this is sometimes the story EMS gives us is the only story we get, whether it be because the patient's confused, because it was a trauma with a car accident, because I had a patient over the weekend that came in respiratory distress and couldn't talk to me. And so the only answers I got were from EMS and yes or no questions.
Yeah.
Just listen to them.
Respect.
Yeah.
I know. Gotta respect the, your CNAs, your techs, EMS, without those people, like providers can't do their job.
Precisely.
And nurses too, as well, obviously. I just think that sometimes
the bottom of the barrel gets forgotten.
Yeah, the very bottom of the barrel you're scraping down there. The people that are getting paid minimum wage to do the hard things. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is all I have on EMS today. There's so much to know and there's so much to learn and they do the baddest shit and they take really good care of our patients, you know?
Yeah. So when you're talking about ethics autopsy for EMS,
The U.S. father of EMS is not the father of EMS.
yeah, ethically don't take credit for other people's work.
Yes.
I think for me, it gets fishy sometimes when we talk about like the different care people can provide depending on their funding source, or, if insurance can cover this EMS ride versus this EMS ride. I think like when you put limits on people's care like that, it gets a little.
And we're lucky in the sense that to get to the hospital, there are no questions about insurance. It's as if you need a ride home from the hospital.
Yeah.
Yes, that then we get into some tough shit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think also sometimes it's just difficult. Paramedics, EMS, like EMTs are faced with ethical decisions every single day. If I give this med, is that the right thing to do in this situation? Just because there's so many more factors than just sitting in a hospital bed. You have your environmental factors, the situation, all of that kind of thing to take into account, especially when you're talking about things like most commonly in our area that has been a big topic, like fentanyl.
Yeah.
And things like that really can cause huge side effect profiles or sometimes death when not pushed correctly, or dosage, because you're doing all that math kind of like on the fly. So there is just a lot of pressure on these professionals to make the right decision.
It's the right decision with almost no resources. So they're listening with a stethoscope. I'm listening with a stethoscope and then calling for a stat chest x-ray so I can tell the difference between pneumonia and pleural effusions or pulmonary edema or something like that. That's huge in difference.
Yeah. But I also think, there has been situations in the past when people tend to abuse their power, and that's really unfortunate. But that's not specific to the profession. It's just, in every profession, there are assholes that are going to do things that are going to ruin it for everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to provide continuous training for all of these professionals within medical services, or really anybody, but so that you can keep testing yourself and prepare for these situations, because they will come.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say about ethics autopsy is I just think we don't appreciate them enough, lean into their education and training enough, because what do we lose in them being the most freaking prepared they could possibly be?
Yeah.
Nothing. Okay, they want to go and become a nurse or a doctor. Fantastic. They're still giving back to our medical community.
Yeah, with more experience than half of.
Yes, yes. Okay, they don't. They want to leave and go do something else. Perfect. What if they run into something on the street and they can still use those skills?
Yeah.
I feel like people see it as a field that doesn't need to advance in the United States because it's about transport to the emergency room. And I just totally disagree with that.
I agree.
Yeah.
So obviously you want to keep EMS.
Obviously.
We still need to work out the best situation for it. But and I hope, all those advancements that are in the works get pushed through so that we can have the best possible EMS system.
I agree.
Listener question, history. Who do you think the real father of EMS is?
Yeah, that's fair.
Does it go to the French?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
And the French win because they're listening to our podcast.
Yeah. We're also thankful for our U.S. listeners, but in this case, their guy had it first.
Yeah. I guess my listener question, like from the medical side this week, is knowing what we talked about with working or living in rural settings and in ambulance deserts, does it change anyone's mind about wanting to go live more of that like rural, quiet lifestyle, knowing if there's an emergency, that it's very high of a difference between life and death? It does mine.
Yeah. Does mine for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Even living with a medical professional, it still is not the same.
No, I don't have nothing here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In fact, when our kid was choking afterwards, I had to use the EMS crew's stethoscope because I hadn't thought to go get mine to take a listen and make sure her lungs were clear. But when it's someone you love,
it's much harder.
All thoughts go out the window.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
on that note, let's end this thing.
Let's do it.
Please, please, please continue to support us. Check out our show notes or any of our links on any of our social media profiles to find our link tree. You can find where to listen, how to support specifically at buymeacoffee.com and our Amazon storefront, which we are slowly building. You can listen anywhere you get your podcast and continue to support us by leaving a review, sharing our podcast, and interacting with us on social media, which helps us get better outreach to have more people discover us.
Yeah. We need more listens.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have an idea for an episode or a case, go ahead and DM us on social media. Also, if you have a cool story you would like to share, maybe about an EMS experience, maybe you are a fellow medical provider, or maybe you're a part of the EMS crew and you want to share some of your stories, go ahead and send us those as well. DM them to us, and we will hopefully be able to put together a really sweet episode because of that.
Yeah.
Next,
we have Freedom House Ambulance Services coming up in a case file this week.
Yeah. What's our next big topic?
Hand
washing. Wash your hands.
Yeah, we should probably do hand washing.
Hand washing.
It's time.
Yeah, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room.
Me and my sterile procedure and is it clean is ready.
Yeah, it's ready. Soapbox is ready to be stepped upon.
We'll step up high.
All right.
All right. Class is dismissed.
Stay safe.
Stay curious.
And don't try this at home.
Unless you own a bone saw.
Bye, all.
This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. We discuss the history of medicine, not your personal medical situation. Nothing you hear on this show should ever be taken as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Some of the information discussed may be incorrect or become outdated over time. We do our best to stay current with medical knowledge, but medicine changes quickly. Additionally, because we do not work in every specific field we discuss, there may be times when we misspeak or misinterpret information. We're all human, and we're doing our best for the podcast. Every medical case is unique, and your health decisions should always be made in consultation with your own qualified healthcare professional. If you have any questions or concerns about your health, please reach out to a licensed provider who can give you guidance based on your individual needs.